guys, welcome back to Gryphon Studio. My name is Alan and I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm making traps. So traps in D&D are always cool. The trouble is that they're not always necessarily useful, or they don't always require pieces to go on the table. Quite often they are mentioned during normal walking, normal adventuring and things, and maybe you trip a trap and maybe there's nothing actually laid out on the board and it just happens and it's all in the theatre of the mind. But sometimes you can have a layout, a dungeon layout or something, and you might want to mark a trap. But the thing is, usually when the trap is found, it's normally immediately disarmed or immediately tripped, and it no longer needs to be marked, which is boring. I want to make some cool traps, so I'm going to make some cool traps. Really simple traps as well. Traps that, like, I'm making these out of like waste pieces, offcuts of XPS foam, and just kind of like things that you can find around your house. Nothing fancy, and just really simple, easy to make, useful traps for my dungeon tiles. Which are the typical kind of XPS foam, half-inch deep, or it's 1 centimetre deep. But it's just the usual kind of dungeon tile layout that people use. So I'm making some traps for them. I was looking through the Dungeon Master's Guide there, and in here there's a couple of cool ones. Pit trap is always really quite nice. The poison dart trap, a fire-breathing statue trap, and one I really like the look of, which is the rolling sphere. That's very like Indiana Jones like, so I think I'm definitely going to make one of those. So yeah, let's just get going, shall we? Alright, so I'm going to start with a 1-inch square piece of graphics medium weight chipboard. I'm just going to use this because it's really cheap, it's readily available, and it's sturdy enough that you can pretty much glue anything to it in small quantities, and it probably won't warp so much. So I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use a few offcuts of XPS foam and some toothpicks or cocktail sticks. These little offcuts here are just waste pieces, so I've trimmed them down into manageable lengths, and I'm going to slice off the edges so that they are 1 inch long, and with a kind of 45-degree beveled corner piece on. So we're going to do that just to frame this 1-inch square. Now with the toothpicks I only need the ends, so I've trimmed them off and cut them down. So I hot glue gunned the XPS foam frame down to that 1-inch square, and I'm just going to use some no-nails glue and stick these little cocktail stick pieces inside it. But having looked at these, they're actually a bit too long, so as I was saying, after trimming them down, I've used some no-nails glue to stick them into place. No-nails glue is pretty good for this because it's very tacky and it holds pretty much straight away, like instant grab, and yeah, really useful for this sort of lightweight materials that I'm working with. Because I can't get my fat fingers into these little tiny spaces, I'm going to use some tweezers, and hopefully this will make it a little bit easier. I'm going to be placing these a little bit haphazardly, a little bit randomly. I don't want too much of a regimented or uniform effect from these spikes. And while that dries, I'm going to start work on another one. This is a 2-inch long by 1-inch wide piece of XPS foam, and there's a few little support pieces here on the back. These are going to act as a kind of beefier base, and they're hopefully going to help stabilize this piece. It's not going to be very thick, and obviously it's quite tall, so I didn't want it to topple over. And it is worthwhile saying that these are designed to go with my dungeon tiles. They can be either sat on top of the dungeon tiles or like adjacent next to. The whole point of these is that once these are made, these can fit in a 1-inch square, so that they can fit easily between two dungeon tiles that might be very close together, and hopefully that will minimize any kind of tile overlap and pieces getting in the way of other pieces and things. So I'm going to cut a small sliver out of the top half of this piece. I'm going to use a piece from my bits box. It's just an old weapon I found, and any sort of heavy bladed weapon would do the trick. I think an axe or a halberd here is a pretty good option. The idea is that somebody would trip a little wire and this thing would just fall out of the wall essentially and right into your space, your area. I have another piece here, exactly the same, but this one has another piece added to the top just to add a little bit of a curve to the wall. I'm going to use my high-tech futuristic technology to kind of stamp in some bricks. Patent pending. The idea, of course, that this would be the kind of basic wall of the dungeon that you want it to kind of blend in, but I'm only putting a very small wall section in place here because I don't want to obscure the dungeon tiles and make it difficult to get your hands in and move your miniatures around. So for this I'm going to use a few small beads from a jewellery making set. These are really tiny. They're probably only about 2.5, maybe 3 millimeters across, and they make great little nozzles and things like that, and I'm going to put these in the wall and hopefully they'll look like little dart shoots, little places where darts, poison darts or something could pop out, maybe spikes or whatever could pop out. Obviously the idea here is not to obscure the space in front of the trap, because that would be a dungeon tile where a person or a miniature might be standing, and you don't want to kind of take up that space when a miniature might be there. So just giving a hint of a trap on these walls is probably enough. And to make sure that these little tiny beads stay put, I'm just going to use a little bit of tacky glue, and that should really be enough to make sure that they don't move around whilst I'm painting. And while that one is drying, I'll start on another one. This is just an aluminium ball. I figured because I use aluminium balls to texture stonework, I think it would look like a pretty good piece of stone. So I just balled up a piece of aluminium and really rubbed it quite smooth against the surface, and hopefully that would look like a really good rolling sphere. I took a piece of XPS foam here for the base, just a very thin piece. I wanted this to fit entirely inside of a 2x2 inch square. I'm just going to make it look a little bit more like stone, so I'm going to texture the base with a few cracks, and I'm going to use the aluminium ball on that as well. Alright, so we've got 4 little traps here ready to be undercoated with black paint and Mod Podge. I'm going to make sure I get into all those little cracks and crevices between the brickwork. And you'll notice I put a little screw in the bottom of this one because I want to add some weight to the bottom, because it is just foam after all. And to add some variation to the brickwork, I just pick out the occasional brick and paint it with a bit of a brown or a warmer tone, some sort of ivory or even reds and dark browns and things. And I also wanted a small fire-breathing statue for one of these pieces, so I found this little guy on a sprue, and he's perfect, a little gargoyle. Cover the whole thing in a pretty heavy overbrush, and that way it will help dull those colours down and prepare it for the washing stage. And at this stage I'm going to add a few metallics here, just a bronze to the little nozzles on the wall. I didn't want to go for anything fancy like silver or gold because you just wouldn't waste silver or gold on a trap, but I figured that they should have a nice metallic colour to them, so I'm using bronze. And for the Deadfall blade thing, I'm using some riser rust on some Rhinox hide. It's just a very dark brown kind of base coat, the Rhinox hide, and the riser rust is a very vibrant orange. You just sort of stipple that on there and give a nice rusty, pretty grim looking blade. And once all that paint is absolutely completely dry, you can start stippling on the wash. I tend to use the stippling motion so that I don't kind of wipe that paint underneath and cause it to reactivate with all the moisture in the wash. So here, just stippling it in, getting into all those crevices, and that will help really add some texture. And I found this little squash ball here. I thought it was a really good size. It's about 1.5 inches across, and it should fit nicely into the kind of 10-foot square that it's meant to be in. And so, using the squash ball, I placed a dowel through a small hole around its edge, and that was just going to help me hold onto this thing while it was covered in glue. I then pasted some tissue paper around the edges, and I want to use the least textured tissue paper that I could find. This ended up being a napkin, but the idea here was that I didn't want any quilting or brand names to show through, and the pockets that absorb all the water or anything. I wanted this thing to be very much stone textured, and hopefully this would allow a very good stone texture to show through once the whole thing was covered in a few layers of this tissue paper. You could of course use anything of a similar size, like a ping pong ball, maybe a racket ball, or some sort of child's toy or something. As long as it's within about 1.5 inches or so across, it's a pretty good size. And with all the PVA glue and paper mache dry, we can remove the dowel just by wiggling it out. And it leaves a hole in the bottom, but that's fine because we can just stick that bit to the base, which is going to be an XPS foam base again. And this thing is still fits within a 2x2 inch square quite easily. Just going to give it the exact same undercoat. I think it's got a slightly better texture. It's a bit more imposing. It's a bit of a bigger ball, and I think it just looks much better as a boulder. So give it another undercoat and a good dry brush, or an overbrush really, and then I did the usual wash that would go on everything else, and then at the end I actually added a little bit of moss. I know Rolling Stone gathers no moss, but this one's been sat there for a while, and it's gathered a little bit of greenery, so why not? Let's take a look at the finished pieces. There we are, guys. A few little traps there for you. Really simple builds, really easy, simple paint job. Like, anybody can produce these, and they should sort of go pretty well in quite a few different missions. Obviously I made the extra kind of like a Deadfall blade trap. You know, it's a really simple idea, and it's kind of been done in God knows how many different kind of genres of games or movies or whatever. You know, it's normally like a swinging blade kind of thing. That's really difficult to do when you don't have a roof on the dungeon. Obviously you don't want to play with a roof on because you can't get your hands in. So just a simple one that comes out the side, out the wall is really easy to do. So there, yeah, 5 little traps there for you. I think I do prefer the bigger rolling sphere rather than the smaller one that I made. It just looks better, more imposing, and a better texture, I think. Yeah, I think, you know, if you can spare a squash ball or a ping pong ball or something, then, you know, it's a really simple, really cheap and effective build. So that's it for this one. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I am on there and posting the occasional thing from around the studio here. It's normally just models and updates on projects and things. I am also on Patreon. If you wish to support the channel financially, that is the best way to do so. That keeps me making videos for you guys, and hopefully help me produce a hell of a lot more in the future. Thank you very much to my existing patrons, because without you none of this is possible, and I appreciate the hell out of you. So thanks very much, you guys. That's it for this one. If you did like the video, please comment and subscribe and hit the like button and all that stuff, and hopefully I'll get one out to you soon. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for stopping by, and happy crafting.